All right, guys, it's finally time to round out this M5 comparison of all the different generations, except for the latest F90 generation. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to drive that one, but I'm joined here by Kevin from the Jabal and Cars YouTube channel.
What's up, guys?
It's now the next day. We finished driving all generations of M3 and 4 generations of M5 yesterday, and the owner of this E34 M5, Yusuf, has been nice enough to make an extra hour-long trip out here this morning so we can wrap up this video. So some information about the 91 E34 M5. This is still powered by a naturally aspirated S38 straight-six engine. It's a revised version of the engine that was found in the E28 M5, which was the first gen. This one, when stock, made around 311 horsepower, 266 pound-feet of torque, but the owner Yusuf has tuned the engine to actually rev to apparently 8,000 RPM, which is going to feel really wrong trying to get it up there, because look at that, the red line starts at 7.
And the tach doesn't go beyond 8. It just
right,
ends at 8.
That's the end of the tach. Otherwise, this car weighs around 3,800 pounds. Depending on the spec, it could be a little bit lighter. 5-speed manual transmission, recirculating ball, steering, hydraulically assisted, similar to the E28. And we also have the SLS rear suspension, so self-leveling suspension. And Yusuf has installed some Bilstein PSS9 coilovers. I'm actually most curious to see how this compares to the E39, because if you guys couldn't tell already from the 4 previous M5s that I drove, the E39 still holds a special place in my heart. So on the interior, it definitely feels a lot older. Look at this wheel, 4 spokes, larger diameter. The build quality is not quite as good as the E39, I would
Larger
say.
gaps between the panels and the interior, but it looks good. Like that 4-spoke, I think looks pretty badass.
It has that sort of classic look to it, whereas the E39 is bordering on classic, but it's still somewhat modern. Oh, the gear shift is really notchy. Long throws, feels stock. Love this though. First thing I'm noticing is just how smooth this straight-six is. Even though the V8 in the E39 is a much more powerful engine and one of the most, I guess, well-respected M5 engines, it doesn't have this level of smoothness. It has the torque, it has the top end and that V8 rumble, but if you want that silky smooth straight-six feeling, the E34 was the last one to give us that naturally aspirated inline-six. Now, being a 5-speed, the gear ratios are a little bit longer, and also the on-center steering feel. This is where this car shows its age, I would say. Compared to the E39 and the E60 M5, which have very direct on-center feel. I mean, look at that. About 5-6 degrees of play in either direction without the front tires actually moving at all. Almost 148,000. So it could be a little bit tired, but I kind of got the same feeling when we drove that E36 M3 yesterday. Like that generation, the early 90s generation of BMWs, just had a little bit more slop in the steering racks. Wow, the throw of this throttle pedal feels like it's a mile long. Obviously, the road conditions today are not what they were yesterday, so we're going to take it a little bit easy. With this car, right away, it feels like it's not a car that wants to be rushed. The E39 signifies a significant step forward in that sort of M-car driving dynamic that modern M-cars are now known for, that hyper-reactive, super responsive feel. This E34 doesn't feel anything like that. It's much more laid back. It takes its time, and it forces you as a driver to take your time. It doesn't like to be hurried through the gear shift. The steering, again, because of that on-center slop, you really just need to set it ahead of time. That's still a pretty healthy amount of power. With a dine-in tune, this feels like it's making well over 320, 330. That's 7,000. It feels like it could keep going up to 8. Easy to heel toe, but you do have to give the throttle pedal a really heavy blip because the travel of the pedal is just so long. What I do like about this steering is that it really loads up pretty nicely in the corners. even though this is recirculating balls, same as the E28 and the E39, this has a good amount of feedback. Brakes feel surprisingly good for their age. Good modulation, not too much play at the top of the pedal. Wow, that was 7,400 RPM. The engine felt like it was still able to go higher, but the power definitely dies off past 7,000. I don't know how you feel from the passenger seat, but this suspension is super compliant.
Yeah, actually, I feel that these built-in coilovers they're nice and compliant. They're not overly stiff, and it fits the character of the car. I think it's a great mod.
I think the overall car feels like a cohesive package, even though it's not that super direct, super responsive kind of sports sedan that we now have come to appreciate in modern times. It's very congruent throughout all the inputs, the suspension, the steering, the shifter, the long throw to that throttle pedal as well as brake pedal. And I would say in terms of driving dynamics and driving pleasure on a back road, this is significantly better than the E28 M5. Being the first generation M5, BMW was testing the waters, trying to see if they could make a full-size, executive saloon or sedan feel a little bit more high performance and fun to drive. But with this E34, it feels like they were really starting to get the formula right. But if I'm being totally honest, I think the jump from E28 to E34 feels about the same as the jump from the E34 to the E39. I think the E39 really does still feel like the sweet spot to me. But also, oh wow, this shift knob just turned. Need some thread lock maybe. But yeah, this car just doesn't want to be hurried. You have to take your time with it. The E39 I never thought to be a super responsive handling or driving car, but compared to this, it feels a good decade newer.
I think the transition from this generation for both the 3 Series and the 5 Series is the most notable in terms of going from a feeling like an older driving experience to a modern driving experience. And you feel the same way going from the E36 to the E46.
I think that's a great point, and that's a point that I made yesterday as well, is the jump from the early 90s to the late 90s / early 2000s for BMW M cars, for both the M3 and the M5, was a really big jump forward. I think if you're looking for that kind of old school feel, I prefer the driving dynamics of the E34 over the E28. Even though the E28, if you want that truly vintage feel, that's the one to go for. The E34 offers just that extra bit of confidence. You can really hustle this thing, albeit with the lazy responses, a lot better than you can with the E28. There's a half-second delay every time I turn the steering wheel before the car actually turns in and sets. But I will say these Bilstein coilovers feel really good right now. It still matches the character of this car really well. I'm coming to really love this long throw throttle pedal. It gives me such just minute control over what the engine's doing. It's the polar opposite to the newer M cars where everything just feels hypersensitive. The throttle response, the steering ratio, even the throws to the gear lever.
Driving these older M5s and M3s, it really makes you miss how smooth these inline sixes were naturally aspirated, just silky smooth.
Yeah.
The newer ones are of course more impressive from a power perspective, but in terms of the smoothness and the linearity, you just can't match it.
Yeah, well said. I think if you want that silky smooth linear power delivery of an inline six in your M5, this is the one to get. This is significantly more powerful than the E28, even though they're both S38s. Stock versus stock, E28 to US spec E34, it's about a 55 horsepower jump. So with that being said, I think it's time to close out this M5 comparison. I gotta say, having driven all the generations back to back except for the latest F90, they pretty much stack rank exactly how I expected. The E39 has always held a special place in my heart. Of course, I used to own that E39 540i, which is kind of a poor man's M5, if you will. And being able to drive a couple of E39s over the past couple of days has really made me appreciate that generation as, again, being just that just right balance of the old school and the new school in a package that I could see myself driving every day in the same way that I did drive my 540i every day. When you go one generation newer to the E60, you gain some engine character with that screaming V10, better on-center steering feel, and overall the chassis feels just as good, if not a little bit sharper than the E39. I don't think the minor improvement in driving dynamics for me really justify losing a little bit of that character that the E39, in my opinion, still has in spades. Then you go one generation older to this E34, and again, everything feels lazier, everything feels a lot more old school. While I appreciate it, I don't think it's a car that I would want to push hard on the back road more than once every couple of months. And an M5 should be a car that makes you want to do that, in my opinion. Otherwise, I just buy a 540 or a 535 or a 530. Then when you go all the way back in time to the E28, I love the way that car looks. It's super retro, super 80s, but from a driving dynamic standpoint, being the first M5 BMW ever produced, it doesn't quite do it for me. It feels just a little bit too archaic. It's not a fully baked product. They were still testing the waters with that generation. Then you go to the F10, and I would never consider buying that car, I'm sorry. As fast and capable as it is, the handling traits, the throttle response, everything about that car felt like it became too digital.
But not even digital, it was like disconnected in a way that makes you lose confidence.
It wasn't quite tuned in a cohesive manner, and so the car just feels nervous. Curious if the F90 changes that. Obviously we didn't get to drive it, but for the M3 comparison, when we went from the F80 to the G80, oh my God, the improvement in overall drivability of that car was
still disconnected, huge. But now you have a lot of confidence, now you have a lot of capability. They've really buttoned it down with the G80. It's like what the F80 should have been, and maybe the same thing happened with the
exactly.
F5s.
At the end of the day, after driving 5 generations of M5, E39 and E60 are still my top two. I can't say.
But this one still looks the best.
Looks are subjective, but
I'm gonna die on that hill.
After seeing this in person, I do see where you're coming from. I really do. But for me, I think the E39 still slightly edges it out.
The E39 has this like badass factor to me, which almost feels like a villain could be driving it, and it's cool.
That's true.
But this one, if I'm looking just from an aesthetic perspective, this one to me just speaks to me.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful car. So that being said, guys, a big shout out to Mark and Steven for putting this entire event together for us here in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Shout out to Kevin as well. He's reviewing the same cars on his channel, so give his channel a follow. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what generation of M5 you think is the best, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yay!
Yay!